week 4 of the African American experience. Today, are there any questions based on the readings or previous lecture, common, current events, etc.? Yes?
I was trying to find the first, I haven't been here in a while, and I couldn't find the first assignment.
Okay.
What we were supposed to do, I didn't know exactly what we were supposed to do.
All right. The first assignment was extra credit, and it was basically reading certain sections of Molefe Asante's book.
Well, I know about the extra credit, but I thought there was an extra credit assignment and another assignment.
Oh, reaction paper.
The reaction paper.
Yes. So, yeah, the reaction paper is based on your reactions to any of the readings, the materials, etc.
Second one is due on Wednesday.
Yeah, second one is due Wednesday, yes. Let's see, starting from where we left off, and even though I don't require you to read any of the books in the reading list, I do refer to them in some material like today, because I think it's useful, especially when you're asking the question like, what is this ancient stuff, how does it reveal what I'm relating to today? So, had a conversation with my niece who made the papers, made Reuters when she was doing part of the Black Lives Matter, which, you know, it's a hashtag, and they claim 60,000 members, but right, they're meeting in cyberspace, so what does that mean exactly? And how do you organize people? And so some of the questions that she had been talking about with me in an hour-long conversation, that she was running into this problem of organizing, where her Facebook friends, you know, don't like the stand she's been taking, which included basically being part of a demonstration at Parker Center, which is, you know, LAPD Central, right? So, you know, she graduated from college, had, you know, part of a sorority, and so, you know, when there's gaps in the police line, she, you know, is on camera, stepping in between the gaps of the police and kind of, you know, telling jokes, trying to get a smile out of them, and, well, great, they consider that an incursion, even if they're not beating your head. Yeah, they do, right? You know, they want you to basically follow their orders, and so, you know, she stepped up on a planner to, like, do cell phone video, and they said, get down, look, I'm not doing anything, and I'm, you know, 20 feet away from your line, and yada, 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 and, you know, found herself getting decked. So, you know, police hits a woman, knocks her down, shotgun in the face, on the ground, you know, when, you know, okay, well, that's LAPD. So, right, you're lucky that, you know, they didn't shoot you, and that would have been interesting, given our family history with, you know, with not necessarily a negative one with the police, but, you know, not known for necessarily being quiet. So yeah, she's following the family tradition, but you also have to understand that once that went to Reuters and Facebook, the police have your phone and all communications. So, not being paranoid, just this is the actual capability, right? And so she's asking me about, okay, well, we have, you know, she's writing this manifesto and all this kind of stuff, and, you know, we want real democracy. Well, what does that mean, and what do you mean by that? Well, I don't know. Well, we want to be taught real democracy. Oh, wait, you want the government-run schools to teach you democracy. Do you understand that the founding fathers, from the point of view, democracy didn't mean you? And democracy did in fact mean, you know, so I'm explaining this to her, and we haven't gotten to this part in our class, in the timeline, but understand that part of American democracy comes out of the English system, not the indigenous democracy that was here. Okay, which included everybody, every adult human being, plus also consideration of natural and living systems, all right? So the founding fathers style democracy came out of the English system, which is Magna Carta, which is basically a deal cut between the rich, noble folks and the king, okay? 80% of the people that were living under the king were illiterate serfs, i.e. slaves, i.e. the common people, who weren't taught to read. In fact, if you later on, if you tried to read the Bible, you could be killed in England, right? So, again, that's the model of democracy where you have elites. We the people is not everybody present. We the people is the educated folks that can lead and understand the concept of leading to maintain their power. Not necessarily for the common good, whatever the common good is. So, one of the things from the last time where the last couple of slides were basically talking about an alphabet. All right, so you are writing in the Latin characters, which basically that's what it's called in Europe. You think it's English. No, it's the English language, but it's Latin characters which came from the Romans, which basically is still following the 26 demotic script model handed down by the Egyptians. Now, one of the books on the list is basically Martin Barnell's trilogy about Black Athena, where he's saying, look, Athena was an African goddess originally from Libya. And basically he's saying his thing is like there's two different models about what Western civilization is and where it came from. So he says it's the Aryan model, which is what you're taught in school. That is, the Greeks pulled themselves up by their sandal straps and created the civilization, created democracy, created all the other kind of stuff. And that came out of Germany, in the German universities. The same people who brought you Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid as a racial construct. Those same folks said, oh yeah, the Greeks brought themselves up by their sandal straps. And then, and he's saying the ancient model. So Martin Bernal's Jewish. So one of the things he's saying, well, I'm not down with the Aryans. And by the way, let's study what the Greeks themselves said. And what the Greeks themselves said is, we got taught by black Africans. All of us went to school in where the universities were, which was in Africa, Egypt specifically. And we got taught specific things. We got taught specific languages and words for things. Like, you know, for example, if I draw this, this figure, what kind of figure is that?
Isosceles triangle.
Okay, isosceles triangle with a right angle in it, right? And what is the largest side called? Hypotenuse. Okay, which is a Comedian word, not a Greek word. Right? And so Bernal's thesis is basically, look, here's what the ancient Greeks themselves said. We learned to school with black Africans. We learned geometry, not Euclid. Euclid gets the credit, Euclidean geometry, all right? Algebra, an Arabic word. Hypotenuse, a Comedian word. So basically, if you saw on that chart, the Kemet, then Semitic, then Phoenician. So basically, Bernal's thesis, backed up kind of by Nichols, and Nichols uses this for his work on axiology, says there's several different ways culture gets transmitted. One of them is by conquest. And so Bernal says, look, 80% of the Greek language is either Egyptian or Phoenician. And Phoenician has a one-to-one correspondence with Hebrew. Right? So what that means is the Aryan model that basically wants to erase any connection to a Jewish history or a people of color history, because the Jews that we're talking about at the time are dark people. They couldn't buy coffee at Newberry's in Eugene in the 1950s. Sorry. So that means they're not white. All right? Because there is no concept of race back then, as we know it. And so the concept of race that we're working off of here in America is only 700 years old. White supremacy itself is only 700, maybe 800 years old. Right? Which is why Du Bois basically says, yeah, right, if, you know, the ancient Romans, you know, saw the whole Aryan notion of, you know, Aryan superiority, they would have laughed. Wait, we conquered you guys and you were wearing animal skins. The people that are civilized are the people building pyramids, live in cities. And that ain't you, but whatever, right? So the reason I'm bringing up the whole alphabet thing is like once you have a pattern for writing and thinking, right, and a concept of literacy, then you can transfer that concept of literacy to be able to read other things. And so then what do you do with that literacy? So you actually might have a language, you actually might be able to formulate words and stories, but you may or may not write them down. Okay, and having been in Africa, that's a tactical error because you have an oral tradition and very few people, if writing is limited to very few people. So with Egypt, right? Longest government, no continuous government in human history, 2,000 years old, right? Big bureaucracy. The scribes, the royalty, the priests, the warriors, they're all literate in a secret language with 30,000 plus characters. But the common folk only get 26. I mean, think of what we can do with 26 characters and what we are doing, but we might be limited in certain spheres. So, what I'm going to show you is the idea about African democracy. So we talked about last time rites of passage, and I'm going to skip through this because that's the basic education. The age grades A through E from 0 to 40 plus, grade B. You've seen all this stuff is up in Moodle. So before the pyramids, even though we are into Egypt, right? So before the pyramids could be built, you have to have a society capable of building pyramids. So Vodun practitioners say their religion is basically 100,000 years old, which means they know how to count. And you know, what's the point in saying that to tourists unless you either, like what? Why would you even say that to tourists? But they said that. So Kemet says time began 30,000 plus years ago. 36 is one figure thrown around. Meaning they track it with calendar, days. I've misspelled months there because just to months, okay, 28-day orbit, and you can basically work out a calendar being 13 days of 28 days each, or you know, the way that we commonly reckoned it in the Gregorian, i.e., you know, the Catholic Pope Gregory created the calendar that you're used to, in which this is January. So, system of education of people and all the sciences necessary to build them, a way of feeding the builders, uniting a nation, and doing this without, let me see, so you can see this. Without schools, institutions, or government. Schools, institutions, or government, one more line. And this is from Chancellor Williams, The Destruction of Black Civilization. So in order for him to describe what the destruction of black civilization was, he had to describe what it is then, in the time before you're creating pyramids. and what you need to do to create a pyramid. So before the pyramids. Now, one of the things I like to do is talk about infrastructure in terms of the law. So when my niece was saying, okay, true democracy, well, what is true democracy, and are you expecting the US government to teach you that in public school? No, they're not going to. Not because they can't, but what they consider true democracy is neither indigenous to this continent nor indigenous to, your genetic four lines. Like I've said before, I'm 1/32 white, so I'm not necessarily going to say that European is part of my heritage, though it is a slight part of my heritage. But in Africa, go back to slide if you will. All right, so ancient African constitutional law. So by using those terms, William is basically saying, look, this is the system that existed, whether or not they're writing it on parchment or papyrus. So our word for paper comes from the Comedian word papyrus, because that's what it was made out of. The Chinese used rice for paper. Right? Nobody used wood products for paper, because you use wood products for building things, making ships. You want to use a fast-growing renewable source, papyrus, paper. So in chiefless societies before cities and pyramids, the first element is the people are the first and final source of all power. The rights of the community of people are and right ought to be superior to those of any individual, including chiefs and kings. The will of the people is supreme law. Chiefs and kings are under the law, not above it. 3, chiefs, kings, chiefs, and elders are leaders, not rulers. They are the elected representatives for the people and the instruments for executing the people's will. And government and people are one and the same. So notice there's no real restrictions on that. It acknowledges that there are human relationships, right? And that, but ultimate power is invested in the people, and elders, chiefs, kings, et cetera, have gone through that rites of passage program and have earned through their actions and their demonstrated wisdom the ability to rule. So royalty in this concept is based on your ability to unite people beyond differences. And it's considered a spiritual quality, passed on through the blood. But if your kid doesn't demonstrate the same skill at uniting people beyond differences, they don't just get to be king just because they're your kid. They have to demonstrate the skill. Right? So you can see that in Europe, when you have an inbred, and I'm not trying to be pejorative, I'm just saying, an inbred genetic monarchy, I mean, this is from a 21st century point of view, you're going to have problems sooner or later. Take, for example, George III, which, I'm jumping around in time, but George III. George III, who we fought the Revolutionary War against. So he was part of the House of Hanover, and he had a genetic malady called porphyria. He went crazy for months at a time. And his wife, Charlotte, a German princess of African descent from the Royal House of Portugal, who he went back, his house, Hanover, had ruled England for, George I, George II, George III. So they'd been ruling England for at least 3 kings before that. He didn't find any English girls that he liked, so he goes back to Germany. In order to be queen, you have to have royal blood. Boom, here's Charlotte. Charlotte writes him a letter at 17. He says, oh, I'll marry you. So, Charlotte, speaks 7 languages, plays harpsichord, et cetera, et cetera. Stunning beauty. He liked her, obviously, because they had 15 kids, so, hey. But Parliament passed a law to allow Charlotte to rule in George's stead when he went crazy. Okay, and where he went crazy was basically having a genetic malady, which is based on inbreeding, but among other things. So that concept of royalty being the spiritual ability to unite people beyond differences, while it could be passed on through the blood, you actually have to demonstrate that you have the skill, not because you're somebody's kid. Okay, which is where the European system, genetic, passed on without the skill. Okay, see the difference, and see where that would come from. So there's technology transfer going to happen. So like with drug technology. So ancient Egypt said, look, we have, we got distilled spirits, drug technology. We also have thousands of different herbs and other preparations, including opium, marijuana, et cetera, but we're not going to let distilled spirit technology out among the common people. The common people still have beer and wine, but we're not going to release hard liquor, what we call hard liquor. Once Greek conquest happened, that cultural value with the technology did not get replicated. So that's why you have Americans giving, or the Puritans, this is before America, giving rum to 4-year-olds, right? The technology, so basically technology mirrors the culture that created it. So part of the technology around leadership and law, in this ancient African constitutional law, the family is recognized as the primary social, judicial, economic, and political entity in the society. The family council may function as a court, empowering to try all internal, that is, non-serious matters involving members of the extended family group. Now understand what I talked about the other day about growing up in an African-American extended family. We're not all blood relatives, but we're related by kinship bonds. And that's the same here. A culture that develops 12 kinds of marriage is acknowledging that there is going to be relationships that go beyond the mother-father heterosexual pair bond. You may not like your little brother or sister. You might find more affinity with your cousins or friends or whatever. This acknowledges that. So, the extended family group. The elder of each extended family or clan is its chosen representative on the council. So not simply the oldest or eldest, so that's often the way to bet, but the person that demonstrates wisdom. Decisions in council are made by the elders. The chief or king must remain silent. So imagine that. That's definitely flipped in terms of the type of leadership that we're used to here. Even when the council's decision is announced through a linguist or speaker, decrees or laws are issued in the same manner to assure that the voice of the chief or king is the voice of the people. Now you can see that our Congress, 2 houses of Congress, et cetera, and a president could come from a system like this, but the way, you and I can't run for president. Okay, that's a reality. And the only, I grew up with a myth that any person could become president. Sure, any person that can become president if they get corporate backing and, are a lawyer or go through the ranks, et cetera, a lawyer, a general, whatever. But not any person. So, this is a nice little point. Number 8, the land belongs to no one. It is God's gift to mankind for use and as a sacred heritage transmitted by our forefathers as a bond between the living and the dead, to be held in trust by each generation for the unborn who will follow, and thence to the last generation. So, no real estate. Real estate literally means, from the Spanish, king's land. Okay? This comes from European feudal system where the king and his subjects, the king, if you were a king's subject, you were their property. Yes, Eddie?
So really, the African system is the reverse of that, because
Right.
the king must carry out the will of the people. The
Right.
council for him, he's gone.
Right,
As just the opposite way around in the US.
right. So, land doesn't, they don't believe in real estate. There, right? And we can also see that system replicated here, or actually evolving separately here. Native Americans didn't believe in real estate either. You can't own land because you didn't create the land. The only property you can create is things that you make. Makes sense. Each family, therefore, has a right to land, free of charge, sufficient in acreage for its economic well-being, for the right to the opportunity and means to make a living, and is the right to live. The land cannot be sold or given away. The land may be held for life and passed on to the family's heirs, and so on forever. The chief is the custodian of the land, the principal duty being to assure fair distribution and actual use. So, you can have as much land as you want. You can pass it on to your family, but you have to work it. But it isn't your property. It's held in common. Previous incarnation of this class, I was invited to go to Burkina Faso, and when this particular student became president, he said, and I'll give you, a few acres of land. Understand you can't own it, but you can work it. Which, hey, I may take him up on that at some point. All money, gifts, taxes, and other forms of donation to chief or king still belong to the people for relief or aid to individuals in times of need. In other words, we don't believe in poor people. Somebody has too much, then the surplus held in trust by the king or chief is given to those who need it. Every member of the state has the right to appeal from a lower to a higher court. Fines for offenses against an individual went to the victim, not the court. Part went back to the loser as an expression of goodwill and renewal of friendship. Another part went to the court as an appreciation of justice. But, notice our system where fines go to the court. African royalty meant royal worth, the highest in character, wisdom, sense of justice, and courage. The founder of the royal line founded the nation by the ability to unite, many as one, must be a real leader, guide, and the people's servant. The people, in honor of the founder of the nation, will elect chiefs from the founder's family line, so long as they meet the original standard for behavior set by the founders, by the founder's character, whose spirit it was supposed could be passed on genetically. But royalty was a spiritual quality. So, the trouble of one is the trouble of all. No one may go in want while others have anything to give. All are brothers and sisters. Each is his brothers and sisters' keeper. So this is when Karenga based the Nguzo Saba, or the 7 principles of blackness, he was basically working off of the work of Chancellor Williams, among others, and basically saying this is basically Ujima. That is collective work and responsibility to make our brothers and sisters' problems our own. And there's a difference between gossip and Ujima. Gossip meaning, okay, we don't talk about people. Gossip means you talk about people's problems, but Ujima means Yeah, you resolve those problems and help them resolve those problems. Age grades, sets, and classes are social, economic, political, and military systems for basic and advanced traditional education. 2, individual and group responsibility roles. 3, police and military training. 4, division of labor, rites of passage and social activities. And in chiefless societies, age grades are the means for socioeconomic and political action. You take through those different levels of society. Bride price or bride wealth, which is basically not to, or also known as dowry, is not to buy the bride, but a gift of acceptance between two families which could be returned if the wife turns out to be unsatisfactory, also the husband, if your society is structured that way. Community is one political party. One political party. So opposition is conducted by leaders of various factions, and those factions are usually in the age groups. Debates could go on until consensus is reached. Once it is reached, open opposition must cease. If opposition is serious enough that they can't accept the new law, they're welcome to start their own society elsewhere. And this is actually how, for example, the conquest of Spain happened. Okay? Through different groups that basically split from the continent and went to conquer Spain. Twice. Not just Spain, but the Iberian Peninsula. So in 1150 BC, it's the first conquest, and then 711 AD. In warfare, the object is not to kill the enemy, but overcome them with fear. Where killing is necessary, be kept at a minimum. A defeated enemy must be allowed to retire in honor. Withdraw from the battlefield. The African religion, not being a creed or article of faith, but an actual way of thinking and living based on the ontology, is reflected in all institutions and therefore reflected throughout the Constitution. So, for example, to take those two things in hand. Slavery in this model, and I think we'll talk about that in later slides, slavery in this model is not a permanent institution. And slaves are basically people who are abandoned on a battlefield in time of war. Because if the war stops, because one side decides to stop fighting, then they're allowed to take their wounded and their dead and withdraw. Anybody abandoned by that tribe and still alive could be a slave. But slaves still have the rights of tribespeople in terms of the right of access to education, access to a system of justice, etc., etc. So politically, the chief is high priest, represents the prayers of the people to his and their ancestors. Socially, rites of passage, songs, dances, purifications, and sacrifices for atonement of sins are important. Multiple spouses are permitted, as a man is forbidden to cohabitate with his wife during pregnancy or a menstrual period, or for the period the child is nursing. Each wife has a set period a husband can be with her. A husband cannot have any kind of relationship with one wife during another wife's set period. Who do you think would set up a rule like that? Women or the men? Women. Yeah. Really? Yeah.
Because that organizes the male's behavior.
Yes. It organizes the male's behavior, constrains the male's behavior. Yeah, you can have multiple wives. I mean, and again, for example, the multiple wife thing that's allowed within the Quran, within Islamic, is based on warfare. Okay, if your brother is killed in battle, you have a responsibility to take care of his family. And since his wife is likely not related to you genetically, you can do that. And so that's why, as it refers to in at least the version of the Quran that I have, basically you could have up to 4 wives, but you have to deal with each one equally and justly. And who would define whether it's equal or just? Them or you? Them. Right? Happy wife, happy life. Right? You've got multiple wives. The women have to work it out between each other. This is not necessarily a male-dominant society. It's an egalitarian society. Because if a woman can lead combat troops into battle, right, sister has to be bad. Right? Because she's fighting with men. And the man is not going to let a woman lead them into battle unless the woman is one bad sister. Am I right or not? Can I get an amen? No, anyway.
It all seems based on really just common sense.
Yes.
From a very positive attitude.
Right. I mean, you're thinking about, okay, this is before their cities. So it's so far back that we can't really even conceive of it, but you're living in common on the same piece of land where you have a village of 50 to 100,000 folks. So you basically have to live in a way that everybody can get along and be organized. Yeah.
And it contributes to group unity and group safety.
Right. So,
in the middle of nowhere.
right. So it's, again, group safety, even though there's not necessarily theoretically a concept of bacteriology or whatever, people know not to poop in other people's drinking water. Right? So, I mean, think about what a group of 100,000, I've been to rainbow gatherings, I've spent time as a black hippie, whatever. So, I definitely caught dysentery from people washing their hair or peeing in the drinking water downstream, which is why I made a point when I stopped going to those things. It's like, okay, these people don't know how to live on the land, really.
It didn't stop.
Yeah, it happened in Woodstock, right? So again, right, that number 20, a woman, each wife having a set period. These rules are set up by the women. Supreme command of fighting forces is under the council, not the king. The king is commander-in-chief. It's because the council has determined they're qualified because of their skill as a general and field commander. This position ends with the war, and the forces return to the command of the council under paramount chiefs. So there are no standing armies. So one of the pieces in terms of looking at this is that everybody has access to martial art training, whatever that was, and weapons for hunting. Everybody has that, regardless of sex or gender expression. But you don't need a standing army. But again, there's ways of negotiating, because obviously warfare is happening, right? So this isn't entirely idyllic. Fundamental rights of the African people, drawn from traditional customary laws or constitutions. Every member of the community had the right to equal protection under the law, the right to a home, the right to land sufficient for earning a livelihood for oneself and family, the right to aid in times of trouble, the right to petition for redress of grievances, and the right to criticize and condemn any act by the authorities or propose new laws. So, for example, opposition groups in some areas called the young men were recognized by law. Now, notice it's the young men, not necessarily the young women, but that's not necessarily a gender thing, but, since the people in the room at the moment are tending towards testosterone dominance, as my dad used to say, you full of urine and vinegar, boy. So we tend to be hot-blooded, hot-tempered, hard-headed, whatever, right? So, the young man basically is, kind of a general principle in terms of who leads a faction, but obviously it doesn't necessarily mean just men, but noticing this universal principle. So these rights, right to equal protection, right to a home, no homeless, no poor people, by law. The right to reject the community's final decision in any matter and withdraw from the community unmolested. The right of rebellion and withdrawal. Right? There's no political parties, but if you disagree, you can leave. Look, this is Africa. You've been trained to survive on the land. Go wherever you want. Hey, you don't want to kick it with us? Fine. It's a big continent. The right to a fair trial. There must be no punishment greater than the offense or fines beyond the ability to pay. The latter is determined by income and status of the individual and his family. The right to indemnity, that is, to be compensated for injuries or loss caused by others. The right to family or community care in cases of sickness or accidents. The right to special aid from the chiefs in circumstances beyond the family's ability. And the right to a general education covering morals, good manners, family rights and responsibilities, kinship groups and social organizations, neighborhoods and boundaries, farming and marketing, rapid mental calculation, and family, clan, tribal, and state histories. Now understand, all this is being pulled off without a central government, without paper or writing. As far as we can tell. I mean, that's what Williams is basically saying. He's saying, look, this is being accomplished without cities. But if you look at the sophisticated organization, that in some ways is better than America, because you're not guaranteed a home here. You're not guaranteed an education that allows you to live off the land if you're homeless. You're not necessarily allowed justice unless you can pay for it. Okay? You're not given a fine. You're given fines beyond your ability to pay, which could bankrupt you. Now, so if you remember that class, the class or the crash construct, right? So, yeah, you're middle class if you make 80 grand, but if you get into an accident in which your medical expenses are more than your annual income or even more than your potential lifetime income, tough. All right, so not to fetishize this construct, but I'm saying, when I'm talking to my niece and I'm talking to you, the point in talking about this at all is that true democracy would look something like this rather than what we got. Especially since we have the physical wealth and the ability in the 21st century to be able to pull off a model like this. We do, but the political will, the education, all that is not there. Unless you make it happen. So, the right to apprentice training for a useful vocation, the right to inheritance is defined by custom, the right to develop one's ability and exercise developed skills, the right to protect one's family and kinsmen, even by violent means, if such becomes necessary and can be justified, the right to protection of moral law in respect to wife and children, and the right which not even the king can violate. That is, for example, there's no first night's rights, as it was in Europe, where the king had the right to sleep with your wife on your wedding night. We don't play that in Africa, or here in indigenous America. You're a human, not a slave. The right of a man, even a slave, to rise to occupy the highest positions in the state if he has the requisite ability and character. So you've even seen this in, for those of you who are steeped in Christian tradition, you've seen this with Joseph. Okay, the biblical Joseph, not Jesus' stepdad, but the biblical Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers and then rose to be the king's counselor. So that basic African context. Any slave, any human being can rise to any position. All they have to do is show the skill and show the ability to unite people across differences. The right to protection and treatment as a guest in enemy territory once one is within the gates of the enemy's village, town, or city. You see this in the idea that you've seen within the Arab world of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but the enemy has the right to safe conduct if they're in your tent or your room. We'll sit down at tea, even with my enemy, because that's hospitality. The hospitality from Islam comes out of an African context. So you can see a lot of these fundamental rights being pictured culturally today. And also then the right to equal share in all benefits, common community undertakings if one has contributed to the fullest extent of their ability, no matter who or how many were able to contribute for. So these constitutional principles, according to Williams, and practices were held on and carried by migrating blacks to every part of the African continent. And one of the most remarkable parts of the story about black or African people, because the societies that sank to barbarism that is less than these principles held on to some of the fundamentals as if they were clutching to the last threads of life. So even in Egypt, where the Asian and European impact was greatest, African constitutionalism could not be completely blotted out. And this is what you also see some features of Black America today, as well as on the African continent, who, even though they might have adopted some forms of government in the colonial era and the post-colonial era and post-war, you can look at the South African Constitution as it currently stands post-apartheid and see elements of this within that too. So just to recap this, so the alphabet piece, and for example, then the letter V becomes U in 500 ACE. VV was also written as W and became W around 1000. And J was the last letter added, evolving from I around 1600, by the time of the King James Bible. So as in INRI, Yeshua Nazarete Rexius Israel. So if you see a Christian cross or a Latin cross with those letters, that basically even it's not Jesus. His name was not Jesus. The letter J did not exist in his time in the Latin alphabet. His name was Yeshua. So INRI. Yeshua of Nazareth, King of Israel. Rexius. All right, so where I wanted to go here since we talked about Egypt, and its influences not only on the alphabet, but in terms of certain religious concepts. So if you understand that, just like I was saying the other day about Moses couldn't have looked like Christian Bale, but he would have, if he was raised as Pharaoh's grandson, then he's going to be raised in the Egyptian state religion. So even though Williams just talked about the African religion, there's no one African religion that rules over the continent. But you have lots of different influences with similar worldviews popping up all over the place with lots of common threads. So when I refer to Yeshua as being Natarian, it's basically acknowledging the thing that not only St. Augustine referred to, but Frederick Douglass talked about in his slave narratives about there's a difference between the Jesus that of the slaveholder that basically allows people to be raped and murdered and lynched, and the actual religion of Jesus. And while he's accepting the American convention of you calling him not by the name his mama gave him, but the name that was given to him by the Greeks, he's saying there's a different thing here. A different thing going on if you go to the roots. So part of those roots are Natarian. So in this particular slide, the figure to the left of the sitting yogi, the caduceus, is not a Greek word, it's a Comedian word. And it's representative of the 7 energy centers, 7 spheres of Ra, 7 chakras in the Indian yoga system, because I believe I used some slides that talked about, there are, the roots of yoga go back to Egypt, not India. India was a colony of Egypt at one point, but this is basically spiritual exercises coming from a particular worldview. The caduceus, which is basically now the symbol of medicine, if you have twin snakes, which basically intersect at 7 places, where the twin snakes are also looking at what is referred to classically as the third eye point. And it's from that point the wings spread. Basically, this is showing spiritual awakening. So anytime that you see an Egyptian god or goddess with wings, that's a spiritually awakened being. And you will also see coming out of the forehead, like with King Tut and some others, a serpent coming out of the third eye. This is also a symbolic of spiritual awakening. So Ra force, or Ra force, also known in different systems, prana in Indian forms of yoga, chi in Asian martial arts. It's accessed through the breath. In Aramaic, ruach is the same as Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit is the breath. The twin snakes, lunar and solar, in the Indian system, Ida and Pingala, moves up the Shushumna, that's also, again, in the yogic system, the central column of the spine, and intersecting at the 7 spheres of Ra, or the chakras. So Natarianism, principles of Shetout Neter, which is in the language of Kemet, the doctrine of the hidden deity. Now, the hidden deity, what a neter is basically, it's essentially saying the supreme being or the hidden being is in everything, hidden in everything. So principles of Shetout Neter. The purpose of life for humans is to attain the great awakening, that is enlightenment. Shetout Neter enjoins the Shedi, which is spiritual investigation as life's highest endeavor. Like knowing who you are, knowing what your purpose is in life. It is the responsibility of all humans to promote order and truth. And Shetout Neter enjoins the performance of selfless service to family, community, and humanity. Shetout Neter enjoins, that is, encourages or orders, however you want to look at that, the protection of nature. It enjoins the protection of the weak and oppressed. It enjoins the caring for the hungry, homeless, and equality for all people. And it enjoins equality between men and women. And enjoins justice for all. So if you look at, if this is the Egyptian state religion, and then you have the 42 principles of Ma'at, which then Moses borrows some of them and they become the 10 Commandments. If you look at some of the original teachings of Yeshua in his language, but even also as they get translated, you see elements of this, of all these things. Love your neighbor as yourself because, well, your neighbor is yourself. Is you. You're the same thing. Separation is an illusion. So, sharing of resources. Not socialism. Socialism doesn't believe in spirituality necessarily. Shetal Neder enjoins the protection and proper raising of children. So the idea of sharing resources and protection and proper raising of children, it's not socialism. Which of your children would you not feed? Which of your family should go hungry? Shetal Neder enjoins the movement towards balance and peace. So Yeshua, even though we're not at this time period, just wanted to explain where this philosophy came from. He was an adept of the Natarianism, which can bestow titles like the Christ, which literally means anointed one, which is the attainment of a state where one regularly experiences what we'll call higher order dimensions of life. Without getting in, I didn't do the whole thing about dimensions, did I? I never talked about dimensions, did I?
Just a little bit, kind of.
Okay.
Touched on it, just a little bit.
So let's say that, if we're going to break this down simply, if the only way that you know how to make fire is by rubbing sticks together, then matches look like a miracle. Make sense? But in order to make matches, you need to know chemistry. Chemistry from chemet, okay? Where things are made of atoms, which is one of the primary gods. Small. Very small, but at the center of everything, Atum was. Atum Ra. Okay? All the gods, all the netters are basically aspects of the same unity. They're intelligence, but they break up into different distinctions so we can talk about them. So atoms are at the heart of chemistry. All right? So all you know how to do is make fires, rub sticks together, matches, look like a miracle. But matches aren't a miracle. They're applications of higher laws of science. And all science is we're going to try something, we're going to ask a question, we're going to create something, and if the answer turns out correct, if I do them and then you do it to confirm, oh, we can say it's real now. And then if he does it, oh, it's real. And if she does it, it's real. By doing the same thing, that's how we put together science. Right? So a person like Yeshua, coming from these particular mystery schools, who are basically saying, we have to answer basic fundamental questions and give answers that are going to be repeatable and replicable in individuals. So royal worth, the ability to unite people beyond differences, is a spiritual quality, which means you actually have to see it, see that you and your enemy are connected, and be able to correct their mistakes if they're making mistakes, or correct your own mistakes so that you ain't got no beef. And that has to be repeatable. All right, so when I say higher order dimensions of life, matches are representative of a higher dimension of life than rubbing sticks together. Okay? If all you know how to do is light fire with matches, a lighter looks like a miracle. But again, higher level of technology, but still growing out of the first one. You're still using chemistry, and you're still using, like you flick your pick, got metallurgy, dealing with oil, plastic separating butane, basically like setting off phosphorus and sulfur, and it's the same thing, higher dimension. Then electricity, another level of fire. Then nuclear, another level of fire, and so on. Okay, so not being mystical, let's be practical and down to earth about this, right? Higher order dimensions of life. Okay? And if you're a Christ, that means anointed one. Literally what this means is that your brain is secreting what we would call neurotransmitters, which are thicker than blood, oily. Okay? The Lord anointed my head with oil. That doesn't mean they pour olive oil on your head. That means you are secreting neurotransmitters which allow higher order perception. Once you're able to do that regularly, you attain the title of Christ. Now, in this framework, there were 7, at least, historical Christs before Yeshua. One of them was Horus, or Heru, okay, in the Egyptian god pantheon. So, for example, another parable, the parable of the swimming pool. Romanized, also I would call it weaponized, Christianity is like a swimming pool. Heavily chlorinated so that everything immersed in it becomes bleached. Pun intended and visual metaphor intended as well. You can become skilled at swimming laps or wading in the shallows or doing water aerobics, and you may shampoo the chlorine out of your hair once you're out of the pool. But if you're going to learn to swim within that spiritual context, basically it's like a pool. You're swimming laps, you can hold your breath, you can do all those things, but the pool of Western Christianity is not the Ethiopian Ocean, which is basically what the old the old name for the Atlantic Ocean. It's not the Sea of Galilee or the River Jordan that Christianity sprang from. Okay, so the point is, it's not, where Christianity came from was not a swimming pool. It was natural bodies of water. It grew up in an African context with African constructs based on what you saw in the African Constitution, the African Bill of Rights, and Shetout Netter. Those principles. All right? So, swimming pools are useful for developing skills with water. But if you're going to surf, scuba dive, or walk on water, you need experience with a deeper ocean, and you best know how to keep your head above water. So, when you first enter natural bodies of water, it's a shock, because they're not climate controlled, right? So part of this is a shock, I understand. Christianity is an African religion that came out of Unitarianism. Yeshua, the Christ, was an African with African senses of humor, wisdom, passion, conviction, and courage, which he held on to his last words on the cross, the true words of which Western Christianity still doesn't use, which is basically, "For this I was kept." Yeshua once said, or Isho for short, "Rome is cruelty," by which he did not simply mean the empire, but also the phenomenon. State cruelty. So the roots of that particular tree of wisdom have been hidden. And so in terms of recreating spiritual practices in their original form, or close to the original form as we can manage. So, for example, as my grandfather taught me, the Peshitta, the Bible in Aramaic, not necessarily King James Version or other English versions. So Aramaic as a language, not English or Latin. And part of that, basically, out of Natarianism, you got meditation, focus on the breath, reverence for the sacred feminine, reverence for nature, reverence for Allah, which basically is sacred unity. So, for example, this is from a book written by Muada Ashby, from The Mystical Journey from Jesus to Christ. So Muada's into basically some of the Egyptian yoga, the African-based yogic systems and spiritual systems. This quote from St. Augustine. So St. Augustine, who's canonized by the Catholic Church, was a Berber, which means he's an African. And his statement was, what is now called the Christian religion has existed among the ancients and was not absent from the beginning of the human race until Christ came in the flesh, from which time the true religion, which is already in existence, began to be called Christian. So he's saying, this has always been here. We're calling it a different name now, but it was always there. So I'm saying what it was always there is basically Natarianism, at least from that part of the world. So Christianity is an African religion. African religion, African roots, African scripture, and an African context. So, for example, where is the Garden of Eden? Oh, okay. A river ran out of Eden. This is in Genesis. 4 rivers in what we call them today, not as it refers to in the Bible, but in order. If you look at that up in Genesis, a river ran out of Eden and divided into 4 heads. So in order of appearance in the Bible, the Blue and White Nile, the Tigris, and Euphrates. Tigris and Euphrates, I believe, are actually mentioned by name. So if you look on a map then, where the Garden of Eden is, that's Ethiopia, the entire Arabian Peninsula, and downtown Baghdad. That's the Garden of Eden. Okay, that's Africa. Because remember, don't say the Middle East, because that's a British thing. It's about 100 years old, even that terminology, the Middle East. Well, middle in relation to what? Far East is China? Do you think the Chinese call themselves the Far East? Far from what? Middle from what? And the Near East, near to what? Turkey is near to what? Oh, Greece? Oh, that's the West? That's Europe? Huh. Okay. Near, middle, far. Yeah, okay. So, language Yeshua spoke was Aramaic. And if you haven't read, I'm basically pointing out there, how many scriptures have you read based on, and directly on that language? The King James Version is not based on Aramaic. They'll say it's based on Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. But he spoke Aramaic, and certainly would have spoken Latin because the state of Israel had been conquered 5 times and was currently under Roman occupation in his time, Yeshua's time. So, if you've not heard of that particular language, well, again, that's part of the whole Columbus discovered America narrative that centers things in a particular time, given a particular story, and certain aspects of that have been edited out. The hero's the teller of the tale. So, for example, word. To create pyramid cities, you need a spiritually aware, literate culture grounded in an awareness of nature and the cosmos, including astronomy. that oral culture precedes and survives a written culture. So understand, people can be illiterate, but they can still speak. Okay? The scriptures, as are told, okay, any scripture, because scripture has to do with writing, right? But obviously they had to be, just like before you can develop papyrus into paper, you have to be able to, feed yourself and then beat the papyrus into paper to write with. But before you have that, you have an oral tradition. Make sense? Right? So this may seem basic, but I'm just saying, let's walk through that history, because before scriptures, they're tales that are told orally, long before they were written down. At least the 4 Semitic sister languages, which were designed for improvisation, personal interpretation, and variation, and to take into account multiple meanings of the same thing. So that you would have to be able to take that into account. Okay? Yeah, Eddie.
Why would they reach a point where they decided they wanted to write it all down? I mean, they had the oral tradition.
Right.
They must, there had to be a decision at some point, was
Yeah,
to preserve it,
right.
simply.
Yeah, to preserve it. But this wasn't universal. I mean, so you can visit Africa today, and this is one of the things that Du Bois was trying to address when Africa was, I'm getting ahead of in timeline, but one of the tactical errors that Egypt, Kemet, and other African societies made was not making universal literacy. Okay? And allowing people to basically keep the history in their heads, so that if the griots died, you lost all that history. You lost that technology. But if you write it down and teach people all the different meanings and all the different stories and all the different nuances, then you keep that. And you write that down, right? So then it survives individual people's lifetimes.
But only with 26 letters for some.
Right, right.
That was the mistake.
Right, that was a mistake, definitely. And I could see that mistake, because, the logic of that mistake. If you teach people hieroglyphics that basically lead to higher order powers, power corrupts. And so, do you want people who have earned, you want people to earn that, or just to be given that? I mean, that's one of the questions, right? So, for example, the use of deadly force. I would prefer that you learn and earn the ability to have a firearm. Okay, that you learn how to, if something, first aid, you learn first aid, you learn how to save life, then be able to field strip the weapon, take it apart, put it back together blindfold, then firing range for accuracy, then with a moral code. Okay, so you're not blowing away people because they insulted you. Like a samurai sword. You don't get a samurai sword until you have certain training, which includes moral training. Because in Egypt, basically, they understood that every technology that you have, any technology doesn't simply mean a way of doing thing as the literal word, that's ology, study of, tech, the technique. It's not just simply a way of doing things. There's a moral implication to it. And each technology you have has a moral dimension. Responsibility. And if you give deadly force into hands of people where it's just a consumer choice, then boom, no moral dimension, it's just money. The ability to take life, oh, well, I'm going to cause fear and I'm going to blow you away because I don't like you, you dissed me, or whatever. No. And we're a comparatively young culture, so, wow, right. Okay, even knights in Europe. Not everybody could become a knight, but you had certain martial arts training. Not everybody could become a samurai. Right? So you intentionally limit deadly force, and you also look at the moral dimensions of any technology. So that's way old school. You have to be a certain age of society to come to that point. And Western civilization clearly ain't that old enough to do that. But other societies were. So notice where that technology exists, at least where they purport to do it before Western civilization starts influencing them. Right? So back to slide. Thanks. So, this is out of hip hop. Understand with your head, understand with your heart, overstand from the point of view of the soul. Word, seen. You cool with that? You chill with that? I'm pointing out in language, there's multiple meanings in words in English. Okay? Peace in the 4 Semitic languages. So I want to point out in terms of the Semitic languages themselves, when we use the term anti-Semitic in English, that's almost always taken to be anti-Jewish. Well, Hebrew is only one of 4 Semitic languages. So I hope I'm training you to do double think. Okay? Hebrew, and the reason I've spelled it like that was once a tribal group, a language, a particular tribal group, like Kiswahili. The Swahili is not a language. It's a tribal group who were traders. They traded with India and sections of Africa and, well, obviously East Africa. They lived in East Africa. They were a tribal group, but also that spoke a particular language. The Hebrew were a particular tribal group. It spoke a language, but they also shared elements in common with 4 others. So, Aramaic, Amharic, Arabic, and Hebrew. So you may think of that acronym as Ah, if this shows up on a midterm. The 4 Semitic languages. So peace, in order. Shalama is peace in Aramaic. Salam is peace in Amharic. Salam in Amharic. Salam in Arabic. And Shalom in Hebrew. Okay, so the Semitic languages are sisters. They're related, but they're not identical. But they all share, just like their parents, the similar meanings and soundings of words, and they also share multiple meanings of the same word. So we, maybe not you, but I'm going to tell you so that we actually do know it. A single word in Arabic can mean 10 different things simultaneously. And you're supposed to understand that. That's what, like word, what does that mean? Not just a little word. True? Seen? Do you see that? Do you understand it? You cool with that? I can live with it. Oh yeah, I'm down. You chill, okay? So chill, for example, from Robert Farris Thompson's book, Flash of the Spirit, where he's talking about a key concept in Yoruba. So a person of royal worth, it doesn't mean a chief or a king, but a person who has learned to calm themselves in the face of danger or stress. Okani tutu. His heart is cool. Right? Even when something should make you angry, you're chill. You're cool. You're calm. And you have a certain power. You're not rattled. Right? So that's where chill comes from. Birth of the cool, when Miles Davis talks about that. It's the same concept. It's complex. You may be, basically bebop was that generation's hip hop. Same sensibility. It's a protest culture that's basically protesting injustice, but it's doing it in a way that requires a great deal of training and discipline to be able to produce that type of music. And if you listen to hard bop, right, it might sound chaotic, but if you listen to it enough, wow, how did he do that? How are they doing that? Yeah, it is.
There's elements of the secret language as well.
It's definitely elements of a secret language. That's why I said, a couple of weeks ago, the squares, okay, if you're hip, you know what's going on. But the squares don't know what's going on. No ears. Right? It's coded language. Yeah.
I mean, like the 10 meanings of one word, that depends on intonation and context.
Well, for example, Alcade. Okay, like I showed you with the constellation. Right? So the beginning of that concept, right? Constellation. Flat pattern in the sky, but you know it's not flat. And they knew it's not flat. Right? But humans don't have a culture long enough to understand that, okay, the Big Dipper has only been looking like the Big Dipper for like 10,000 years, and 10,000 years before is something completely different, and in another 10,000 years is going to be completely different because all the stars are moving relative to Earth. Right? So the constellation, flat picture in the sky, not flat, so boom, that's one level. Different stories from different folks. Starry Plow in Chinese, Big Dipper in English, Great Bear for Native Americans. Okay, the scales, okay, and in one story, in Arabic, which all the stars are named in Arabic, the leader is Al-Qaeda. Okay, and Al-Qaeda means not only the leader, the commander, it also means the code that we live by in following the commander. It also means the base of the fortress wall that protects us. All at the same time. And a star. All right? So, understand, okay, so you get that history, like, wow, are they being tricky? No, that's built into their language.
Elemental force.
Elemental forces, right? Elemental forces rule, okay. And that entire constellation is basically circling around the place where evil came into the universe, and they are constantly on watch. Because evil killed one of their folks, and that star is that constellation is basically the funeral barge on which we're guarding evil from coming into the universe. And where does, who's the great Satan from their point of view? Right. Us and the Western world. Why? Because of the things that we've done historically. So when bin Laden talked about, oh, yeah, we're coming after you because of something that happened in Turkey 100 years ago. What? Huh? Americans are, what? Wait, you did 9/11 because something happened in Turkey? Like, did we have? Yes, we actually did have something to do with that, but hey, we don't remember that because that's not in the Columbus discovered America narrative. Please understand, I'm not justifying the actions of Al-Qaeda. You have to understand how your enemy thinks. You do not have to agree with what they think or their conclusions or actions, but you do have to understand why they think the way they do. And it may not be simply crazy. It might be remembering something that you forgot or were never taught. Could be taught, but weren't. So, yeah, like Al-Qaeda, multiple, 4 different meanings, including a star or more. And then the constellation, deeper history, too. So, in Aramaic, Shala Shem means pray in my name. But it doesn't mean saying Jesus, 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 or even saying anything out loud. It's in silence. So then different words, Allah, which is in Aramaic, Elohim, which is another name for the Supreme Being in Hebrew, Allah, Al, meaning the, La, the nothingness, Alat, a moon goddess worshipped at the Kaaba, Ka meaning body and Ba meaning soul. The Kaaba, a moon goddess. So Alat was a moon goddess whose symbol was a crescent moon, which goes through changes, and a star, which is a symbol for Islam now. Okay? The moon goddess was worshipped at the Kaaba. Huge black rock in which 99 names or aspects of the goddess were written until the patriarch Abraham, who's revered by Jews, Muslims, and Christians, came 5,000 years ago and said, no, we ain't worshiping no moon goddess here. We are going to worship the one God, male. And we're going to erase those 99 aspects of the goddess, but they survive in Islam as the wazifas, which are the 99 beautiful names of Allah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We begin in the name of Allah, most merciful and compassionate. Ya Jamil, the beautiful. Ya Fatah, the opener of the way. 99 names, 99 wazifas. Okay, so the concept gets translated even though we're not explicitly having a sacred feminine. But, so if you didn't know that, Allah is not supposed to be genderfied, male. Allah is supposed to be beyond gender, right? But you think of it being male if you don't know about Alat, which is the manifest. So, the nothingness is the creative force, the manifest. See how that works? Nothingness to manifest. Male might plant the seed which grows in secret in the woman brings forth the child. Okay? This is also the original trinity of Christianity. Mother, Father, and the child of true humanity, which is neutral for gender. Not Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Wait, where's Mom? How do you have a father without a mother? And why would you erase the mother? I mean, you might say, Hail Mary, Blessed Mother of Jesus, blessed is the fruit of your womb, etc. Okay, Holy Ghost, what's that? Father, Son, Holy... Wait, where's Mom? Mom died? No. Sacred feminine gets written out. Also in every time Yeshua is quoted as in the King James Version as using the singular pronoun, in Aramaic he's actually saying the word ena, which means I and I. I and I. Inna. I and I, which as a Rastaman would tell you, okay, means me. It means me and you. It means us. It means us and the Supreme Being simultaneously. Again, the word thing, okay? Multiple meanings in a single word. And you should know the multiple meanings without being told more than once. That is, if you're not square. We be doing it. Okay? Now, this is basically talked about in terms of Ebonics, and Ebonics is basically slang English, but actually what Ebonics is English with an African sensibility. We be doing it means simultaneously we did it, we are doing it, we will do it, we will always do it. That's the way we roll. We be doing it. Am I right or wrong?
It's the same thing as digging.
Dig it, right. Not literally digging. Do you feel it? Do you understand? You feel me? Same thing.
Understand?
Understand? They be doing it. They did it. I'm conjugating the verb to be and the being state. They did it. They are doing it. They will do it. They will always do it. That's the way they roll. So, Ebonics is not bad English any more than Scottish is bad English. Ebonics is English with an African sensibility, able to convey multiple levels in less words. Okay? This comes out of an African construct with languages, definitely evidenced by the 4 Semitic languages.
It's almost like Ebonics predates English.
It does, in that sense, in terms of, basically conveying language and meaning. Right? Hidden meaning, same word. Cool, cold, chill. Okay? It's not just temperature, it's also bearing. Conduct. Especially in the face of conflict. This is where, Robert Ferris Thompson talks about tracing that to a Yoruba concept. White art historian from Yale. Robert Ferris Thompson. And so, hidden meaning, double meaning, same word, bad, deaf, sick, crazy. The literal meaning, the hidden meaning. Same spelling, different language. Aware in English. Aware, Japanese. Aware is basically the feeling you get when you're seeing something that's beautiful but it's transient. It's going to disappear. Like a flower that's been picked, or a sunset. Aware is like the feeling watching a sunset. You're in awe, it's beautiful, and the point is it's going to be gone. You know it's going to be gone, but while you're experiencing it, wow. Okay, which is different than aware. Ritam param bhagyam. It is if it ever was. All right, so I'm basically saying these are coming out of a certain cultural construct that's older than America. And some of them are shared, and they're influenced by each other in the ancient world, or what we might think as the ancient world, but that might not be too long ago. Abun de Boashmaya in Aramaic is I bet I can show this to you. I bet I can. You probably don't want to see any of our assignments, right? Lord's Prayer translated? Yeah, here we go. Abun de Boashmaya. This comes from the work of Neil Douglas Clatts, also known. So the Aramaic is in bold letters, then King James translation. So our birth in unity, Abun de Boashmaya, So there's at least 3 levels of Aramaic. There's a literal meaning. There is a relational meaning, which is basically the word play between the words, multiple meanings suggested, and then a third metaphorical meaning. All right? So, Buon Debashmaya, love, the King James Version, Our Father which art in heaven. Now, one of the features of an African-based religion is there is always a sacred feminine. Okay? Biology basically hasn't changed for humans for 250,000 years. Male and female to create new humans. All right? So you ain't going to leave out mom. All right? As Alice Walker talked about in The Temple of My Familiar, if you said the equivalent of mother raper, they could ask for your tongue. Because you have profaned the language and the concept of mom so bad, you may as well never speak again. And you give it. Right? So, sacred, literally, Abun Debashmaya literally means birther. And I don't know about you, 2,000 years ago, fathers weren't birthing anything. Biology didn't change. So, what is he saying by this being the Lord's Prayer? Oh, Mom, you create all that moves in life. Oh, birther, Father, Mother of the cosmos, you create all that moves in life. That's the literal meaning. O thou, the breathing life of all, creator of the shimmering sound that touches us. Respiration of all worlds, we hear you breathing in and out in silence. That is, when we're in silence, we can hear you breathing. Source of sound, in the roar and the whisper, in the breeze and the whirlwind, we hear your name. Radiant one, you shine within us, outside us, even darkness shines when we remember. Name of names, our small identity unravels in you, you give it back as a lesson. Wordless action, silent potency, where ears and eyes awaken, there heaven comes. Okay, so, literal, O birther, Father, Mother of the cosmos. You create all that moves in life. And then, wordplay and then metaphorical levels. From one line.
So these are all different interpretations of
Oh, the same line, in the same language, yeah. Nefkadash Shemak, hallowed be thy name. Focus your light within us, make it useful, as the rays of a beacon show the way. Help us breathe one holy breath, feeling only you. This creates a shrine inside, in wholeness. Help us let go, clear the space inside of busy forgetfulness, so the name comes to live. Your name, your sound can move us if we tune our hearts as instruments for its tone. Hear the one sound that created all others. In this way, the name is hallowed in silence. In peace, the name resides. A room of one's own, a holy of holies, giving light to all. We all look elsewhere for this light. It draws us out of ourselves, but the name always lives within. Focus your light within us. Make it useful. Yeah, Avun de Bashmaya. And then this is love your enemies. Aheb lavwel babakun. Except in Aramaic, it's instructions on how to do it, which do not include turn the other cheek. But it basically, just like what you saw in the rest of the Aramaic, tuning into breath, slowing your breath down is like a form of meditation. That is the central point of this. So essentially with Aheb lavwel babakun, essentially Aheb is the word used for love. So love your enemies, okay? But it's not, as in the Greek, agape and eros. Okay, eros is erotic love, eros, erotic. Okay, agape, brotherly love, but in this Greek sense, brother is not just a male person, it's any other human, right? So both agape and eros require another human. Aheb refers to love as a mysterious force that brings things together beyond the personal, beyond the human, to create new life in secret. Okay, so it could refer to a seed, it could refer to a sexual relationship, but it also refers to this impersonal, that is, transpersonal force that brings things together in secret. Now, how you access it is through the breath, because the breath connects you to all. As you saw in the previous Aramaic sayings, talking about, oh, you're the one name, you're the sound that creates other sounds, you're the breath that breathes in us. Same thing, right? So, in Aheb lavwel babakun, love your enemy, bring yourself to rhythm within. That is, you deepen your breath, because that's the only thing you can consciously, easily control, right? Because remember, this is Yeshua. He's speaking to an audience. He's not illiterate. So he's using something that he has to basically talk to people in a way that they can understand if they're not literate either. Okay, so you lengthen your breath. You see into your own heart. In order to see into your enemy's heart, you have to see into your own heart first to see into their heart. Once you do that, you can see the mistakes that they're making and the thing that makes them your enemy. Okay? Lavwel babakun is basically referring to a being that's moving with harsh, jerky movements in relationship to you. An enemy, okay, lavwel babakun is basically saying, well, they may be in relationship to you, an enemy, but they're still in sacred unity. They're still part of sacred unity. So you have to see inside their heart to see what they're doing, what mistakes they're making, how they've fallen out of unity. And how you deal with them now is you bring yourself into unity first. You bring yourself into rhythm first. You might not even deal with them. But if you see their mistake, you don't have to make it. And you can avoid them. And actually, you can even see what they're doing before they realize they're about to do something. And stay out of their way. As Bruce Lee would tell us, best way to avoid a fist is not to be there when it arrives. Dalai Lama was asked, well, what if you walk down a dark alley? And he says, I don't walk down dark alleys. Right? Love your enemy doesn't mean turn the other cheek. It means self-knowledge, self-love to the degree that I can see where you're coming from and I can let go of any animosity because, wow, I might make that same mistake too. Thank you for showing me that, but I'm not going to be there. Back to slide. Thank you. So what I've just done is in Midrash, it's called Midrash or Drash in Hebrew, or Jidrash in Arabic. Same concept. To internalize and interpret Scripture in a personal way particularly when the language has multiple meanings built into the word already. So it's actually easy to do this, and it's proper to do this because people have different experiences, they have different levels of understanding, and I'm going to make this explicit. This sensibility came out of the Egyptian mystery schools because it acknowledged there's at least 3 different levels of humanity with respect to this material. Okay? So there's the initiates who just are being shown consciousness. Then there are the next level where they've started to see the inner vision and their vision is open. And then the third, at the Christ level, the mastery level, the self-mastery level, your word becomes reality. You speak reality into being. You become sons and daughters of light and or Christ-like, where your word becomes manifest. Your vision becomes manifest. It's simply higher law. And it's replicable. I mean, so when Yeshua says, greater things than these shall ye do, he's literally basically following a principle of Natarianism in a different form. So, Midrash and Jidrash. Internalize and interpret Scripture in a personal way, particularly when the language has multiple meanings built into it. And in the last 2 minutes, basically the Peshitta, the Bible in Aramaic. Oldest dated biblical manuscript in existence. It's in the British Museum in Cairo. I read it in the Register Guard. The oldest book in the world was an Egyptian Bible. I mean, that's literally what they said. And they're referring to the Peshitta. So, Old Testament was written down in AD 464. And then it basically from the Eastern Patriarch, Catholic Patriarch, basically says, this is the Church of the East received the Scripture from the hands of the blessed apostles themselves in the Aramaic original, the language spoken by our Lord Jesus Christ himself, and that the Peshitta is the text of the Church of the East, which has come down from the biblical times without any change or revision. But that's not what King James is. King James Version is translated from Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, but not the original, Aramaic. And there's some critical differences, like Ahev Lav Will Babak. And we'll continue on Wednesday.